Hello, and welcome to The Objective. If this is your first time with us, we're very excited to have you, and we hope you like our show. If you've listened to us or if you've watched us a couple times, welcome back. We're glad to have already such a good band of loyal followers.
Storybox Audio.
So without further ado, let's jump into the show. This is Dr. House. He's about to save the day and save this little boy's life. This is Gil Grissom. He's working on a case that was unsolvable by everyone else, but he is going to solve it by the time this show is over. These two men, and countless others, inspired me as a child, and probably a few of you listeners as well. And they intrigued me even more, because, at least to a kid, and even to an adult, they're frickin' geniuses. And why? Well, they use deduction, my dear Watson, right? That's what we all think. It's so secret that Grissom from CSI and House from House are both loosely based on the famous Sherlock Holmes, and naturally their technique of deduction is very similar to his. But deduction can be incredibly fallible and even dangerous if used the wrong way. And that's what makes these guys so special, because they avoid the normal pitfalls of deduction and induction. So, do you want to think like them? If so, let's jump in to how they think. There are a few ways to solve complex problems, which are basically forms of reasoning, right? Anytime you're using logic or reason, you're basically problem solving. The jury's kind of out on how many different types of reasoning there are. The number goes from 2 to 9 depending on who you consult, but generally most folks are familiar with inductive and deductive reasoning. These are the big ones. We have Sherlock Holmes and his science of deduction to thank for our familiarity, so dispensing with all of the fancy terms, let's explore it this way. There are two ways to figure something out, either outward in or inward out. So we'll explore each of these. Let's try inward out first. In inward out, or inductive reasoning, I, we look at a bunch of specific items and come up with generalizations about them. So these dots you're seeing might be trees we're looking at, and we want to come up with a generalization about trees. They might also be people. They might be yield curve inversions. Whatever they are, we are going to look at them and come up with a generalization about them. Right? That's inductive reasoning. A lot of times when this is taught, it's taught that inductive is inferior to deductive, and that is not the case. A lot of disciplines, a lot of people use inductive reasoning correctly and significantly every day. History uses inductive reasoning quite a bit. Economics, social or empirical sciences use inductive reasoning quite a bit, right? These things happen multiple times in this way, therefore this is a trend, right? Then we have outward in, or deductive reasoning. Here, we're going to start on the outside with generalizations, and after we have enough generalizations, we're going to infer something about a specific item, event, or occurrence. So we might say, here's the famous example, we might say, all men are mortal, right? All men are mortal. We might also say, Socrates is a man. Well, if all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, then Socrates must be immortal. Be amortal, not immortal. Amortal. Does that make sense, right? So, hopefully that makes sense. If it's still a little fuzzy, which it might be, feel free to Google it, and you'll find all kinds of examples. All kinds. And hopefully the rest of the episode will flesh it out a little bit for you too. All right. So these are the two types, right? Inductive and deductive. Let's also take this into account. Inductive is faster. It's a faster form of reasoning, but it's not always right. It's not always correct, right? So if you get 10 trees and you look at those 10 trees, the generalization that you come up with might not actually apply to every single tree out there. It might apply to a majority, it might apply to 90%, but it's not going to be 100% true. Okay? Deductive reasoning, however, is slower. It's a lot slower, but it is 100% right. That's why deductive reasoning gets all the accolades and is the preferred method of Sherlock Holmes and all these folks, because it is always 100% correct, assuming your inputs are all true. So I think of it like a calculator almost, right? A calculator, you enter the numbers, and the formula that you tell it to do, it will always perform that formula correctly, right? 4 plus 4 will always equal 8 on a calculator. Now, where you mess up on a calculator is when you enter the wrong numbers, right? You misread the numbers, you type it wrong, you fat finger it, whatever, and that's how you get a wrong answer. It's the same way with deductive reasoning. The deductive reasoning is a calculator. That formula is a calculator that will always give you the right thing, so long as your inputs are accurate. All right, so why doesn't everybody use deductive reasoning and be right 100% of the time? Well, one, because deductive reasoning is slow and takes a lot of time. And as I've hammered home, hopefully, the inputs have to be pristine, right? They have to be 100% correct. And for this reason, we generally use deductive and inductive reasoning together. All right, if you want to prove it to yourself or not, what's a food you don't like? At some point in your life, because everybody has a food they don't like or something. If you don't, think of something you don't like. And at some point, you used inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning to decide you didn't like it. You induced, after a few tastes, right? Maybe as a kid, maybe as an adult, but you induced either after taste or after someone telling you it tasted bad, something, you had a couple data points and you induced that all of that thing is bad, right? I had bad fish this night. I had bad fish the next night. My mother said fish is terrible. Therefore, all fish is bad. That's your induction. You use specific examples to make a generalization. You then immediately, you didn't even realize you were doing it, you then immediately used deduction on your current meal. The restaurant we're going to only serves fish. All fish taste bad. Therefore, this restaurant's food is going to taste bad, right? This meal has fish. I don't like fish. Fish is bad. That's how you use the inductive and deductive together. And we do that most of the time. Most judgment you've made of foods, ideas, of people is a form of deductive reasoning based off of generalizations you formed using inductive reasoning. And inductive reasoning, as we've seen before, is not always 100% accurate. It can sometimes give us false statements. We may induce, after seeing 10 trees, that all trees have green leaves, but we'd be wrong. We may induce that all sweet cornbread is the devil, which it is, after having a few meals with the in-laws. And of course, we'd be 100% right. We may induce, after seeing 3 folks with different skin color, that a certain race is lazy or all criminals. See, inductive reasoning can be right, but it can be downright wrong sometimes. But it is where we get our generalizations for our deductions, right? We don't just have a book of proven generalizations that we can use. We use inductive reasoning to get these generalizations. So what are we to do then? Well, we challenge it. That's how you get an inductive reasoning result that is right. You challenge it. Inductive reasoning is not 100% reliable because of this thing called confirmation bias, which I will mention in almost every one of my videos because I despise it. It is a terrible thing. And confirmation bias is where once we've identified a pattern, we tend to accept that pattern and kind of quit challenging it. We just accept that's a thing. And we keep any evidence that confirms it. And the worst part, we tend to ignore any evidence that disconfirms it, that rejects it, that proves it false. The only way to overcome this shortcoming is to challenge it. This is why the scientific method emphasizes disproving your hypothesis, not proving it. This is why statistics uses a null hypothesis. This is why when it's late at night and you hear a strange sound followed up by nothing, you generally get up and investigate, even though the sound has stopped. You could use confirmation bias to say, hey, there's no sound. Therefore, everything is fine. But you're very scared, so you're going to challenge it because you want to be sure that there's nothing there. In the same way that science wants to be sure that the result is accurate. In the same way statistics want to be sure the result is accurate. So how do they overcome that and be certain there's no monster in your closet? You get out of bed and you try to find that monster. And this is what our TV sleuths are so good at what they do. Because when they approach a new case or a crime scene, they are immediately skeptical of inductive reasoning. But they have to use it to start. Remember, it's the fastest way to get started. So, if a wife gets murdered, inductive reasoning says, look at the husband, right? Because we all know that statistically, the person that murders the wife is the husband. So inductive reasoning says start there. But they would start by proving it wasn't the husband. The same way you would ensure there's no monster by trying to find the monster. This is where us mere mortals fall short, because we don't generally approach life that way. If it looks like the husband was the murderer, we pursue that directly, and then just try to prove the husband was the murderer. We don't try to disprove it. But they do. These geniuses, right, of TV, of lore, they do. And they fail at it. Usually a couple times an episode. But then eventually they get enough information to come to foolproof generalizations that they can then enter into their deductive reasoning machine, their calculator, right? They want to make sure that the premises they're entering into that final calculator are accurate, are 100% sure. Whereas you and I are going to use inductive reasoning and we're just going to, oh, is it 80% right? I'm 80% sure that all trees have green leaves, right? I'm 80% sure that I don't like this food because I've had it 3 times 20 years ago, right? That's how we live our life. That's what works for us. These guys are different. These people, these fictional characters are different because they challenge that. They push that. They say, nope, let's try the opposite. Let's disprove. So, our TV sleuths, they spend the first 30 minutes putting together the patterns, failing with inductive reasoning, failing on purpose. And then, once they've got what they deem to be enough solid, true premises, they will start their deductions. They'll turn on the machine, so to speak, and start entering their premises and figuring out the deduction. There's a reason these geniuses are always quirky, right? Sherlock is pompous. Greg House is rude and cynical. Gil Grissom is aloof and removed. They're quirky because it makes for good TV, let's be honest, but also because it gives a good reason for why they're comfortable challenging everyone's presumptions. The pompous guy whose ideas are always right, the rude man who thinks you're an idiot, or the aloof guy who's obsessed with finding the truth. And there's the secret of these TV detectives. It's not some mysterious logical trick. No, the secret to their success, the secret to why they're always right, is that they challenge their assumptions before making deductions. They don't just go with what inductive reasoning tells them. They test it, they fail, and they keep going. Thank you for watching. We hope you liked this episode. Please leave comments. Yeah, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself and to your neighbor.
Storyblocks Audio. Storyblocks Audio.